Hey pillars, and welcome to a new video. Now 2025 is upon us. The content is getting better, the quality is getting better, and I was lucky to collab with a drone company called Hover to give a quick review of the HOVERair PROMAX. So I actually want to show you guys what that looks like. So it comes in this nice carrying case. You can see this is the drone. Has 4 blades, has a gimbal. Now also there's no controller, no phone needed, and it's about 16 minutes of flight time per battery, and you can capture epic shots without missing a beat. So is this just a clever marketing, or does it actually deliver? And that's what this video is going to be. It's going to be an unbiased deep dive into this drone's performance while cycling. Now the drone weighs 192 grams, give or take, which is actually lighter than my current phone, and the drone can also fit in your jersey rear pocket, or if you have a handlebar bag, it can fit in that as well. So it's pretty easy to take on rides and just pull it out when needed. It's built with this head material, which is actually lighter than carbon fiber, and it's tough enough to handle a couple drops, which I definitely have had while testing this drone, and I will explain what the reasons for those drops were, but you know, it is to be expected. Now the drone is super simple, super sleek, and you can just use one button to launch it and choose the actual modes. So the app, there is an app specifically for the drone that you can use in unison, but in terms of while you're riding, once you have all your main shots set up, you don't really have to access or connect the drone to actually start videotaping. Now, honestly, when I had the HOVERair in my hands initially, I thought there's no way after a couple crashes that this is not going to break. And I can say after crashing it and actually going on a couple rides with it, it's safe to say that the drone is super solid, which was actually surprising. And I'm pretty happy now that I have basically a film crew in my back pocket. And that's something that, you know, depending on how many riding buddies you can have while you ride, and if they can videotape you, and sometimes they don't even know how to angle shots, it's nice that you can get wide angles, close-up angles, side angles, front angles, and you don't really have to depend on other people. So that's one key thing I'm already super in love with using this drone. Now, initially when I thought of drones when cycling, even I would get overwhelmed thinking, oh, I have to use this like controller to get it set up. It's going to take a while. It's going to mess up the ride. And the coolest thing with the Hover is that it has no controller, no app in terms of having to use it to take off. You just hold it down, press the button, and it takes off from your hand. So that's one thing that's like, it really does feel like sci-fi in real life, because it basically has a brain of its own. And compared to the drones of, you know, a couple years past, having something that integrates into your ride so easily is something that I never thought was actually possible. It also has AI-based tracking, so as soon as it takes off, it actually automatically locks onto you while you ride, and it works even if you're moving when you launch it. So I've tested around. Obviously, for full transparency as well, there are times where it will get confused because there's obviously a lot of different things in the environment, fast cars, and just maybe you're not in frame initially when it has to lock onto you. But out of all the tests, it is something that's like an 85-90% success rate, and usually it's most likely you did something wrong when it comes to not tracking properly. So maybe you didn't angle it properly in front of you or behind you. So that's something that you just have to take your time, but once you actually get it up and going, it really is solid. So the biggest thing with this drone is that it has autonomous flight modes, meaning that if you're not someone that's super familiar with drone controls, to get different shots like aerial shots, side shots, zoom out shots, that's a lot to expect. So the fact that there's an autonomous mode that the HOVERair uses that has basically like 10 plus intelligent modes, I'm going to go through them. You get a variety of shots, which when you compile them all together, it just makes your ride like become so epic. You can go from, riding from an aerial view to a side view to zooming out to where you are if you get to like an epic lookout. So there's a lot of modes that you can play with, and even myself, I've played around with drones in the past, like DJI drones and whatnot, but in terms of using, while cycling, I've never played around with it until now. So there's a follow mode, which locks behind you when you ride. There's an orbit mode, which circles around you. So you can get like cinematic shots as well, which depending on what style you're actually trying to go for, you can play around. You can see what style fits for you. There's bird's eye view, which is like the classic drone overhead angle, which is perfect for climbs, and I definitely will be taking this drone out for climbs. It's just way too cold, especially with the elevation gain, so I have not played around with the drone in the mountains, but it basically will perform just as it would on, flat terrain, for example. Now, when I was playing around with the drone, even in my house, you have to be very careful with the distances. So meaning orbit or how high it elevates, it has meters. So you have to be very careful, because if it's a 5-meter radius and you're trying to get an orbit shot, it might actually hit you or hit into something. So you have to be conscious of where you are, the space that you're using it, because even though it's intelligent, you as the drone operator indirectly have to make sure that the initial environment is not going to put the drone at a disadvantage. Like if you're very close in a tight space, it's obviously not going to be able to orbit 5 meters around you. There's no space. But basically, there's a multiple of modes that you already have locked onto the drone that you can pick from the app. And then while you cycle, if you already have, the styles of shots that you want to take, you don't need to connect it with the app. So the app will allow you to change and test out different modes, but once you basically have your drone set up, you can just ride and expect that just from the drone itself, you can select all the modes without having to open the app. So it saves a lot of time with like going on the side of the road, connecting the app, and then choosing what mode. It's just hold it down, select the mode from the drone itself, and then just, fire it up and then shoot your shot. Now, one thing a lot of people will be skeptic is how a drone this small is able to take such good quality, videos. And let's talk about the camera quality, because it actually blew me away. We have 8K at 30 FPS, which is crystal clear for those scenic rides. 4K at 120 FPS, which is good for slow motion shots, and then HDR video at 10-bit, which is good for, sunrise or sunset rides. So there's a lot of different, camera qualities in terms of, video outputs on what you want to play around with. Obviously, you have to be conscious of how much storage that takes, and then basically making sure your drone, you offload it and you don't just have it loaded up with 8K footage. Now there's night tracking as well, but obviously it's not going to work in pitch dark. You're not Batman, so riding through Gotham. So if you're, doing it around sunset or under street lights, it's pretty good. But obviously if it's pitch dark, it's not going to be able to track you accurately. Just don't expect that to happen. Now moving on and talking about battery life and flight time, which is super important, because for a long ride, you're obviously not going to just want to use all of it at one section. You want to spread it out. So it comes with 2 batteries, and each battery has about 16 minutes of flight time per battery. Now, that's 16 minutes of continuous flight, not total filming time. And the reason why that's important is because if you're using something like Sidetrack or Bird Eye, it actually requires more maneuvering of the drone, meaning it has to use more energy basically. So you can expect to get around 10 to 13 minutes in different modes as well. So I would say for simplicity, because obviously, in perfect conditions, it would say 16 minutes. I would say, aim for around 10 to 12 minutes per battery. But on a ride, that gives you about 20 minutes. And if you spread that out for a 2-3 hour ride, that should be more than enough time to get all the shots that you want, and you can make a cool compilation. Now, for some smart features for cyclists specifically, they added an actual cycling mode, and they also had the ski mode, which was as close as you could get for cycling, but it's really, really good. Now, they do say you can start, there's voice commands for this drone as well. I haven't actually yet tested it because I actually didn't know about it, but you can start by having the drone, start recording or follow me, and it actually works. And they even, say it works in the wind. So I've yet to test that, but I will. Now there's a beacon controller that you can get with this as well, but I have not used it yet. It didn't come with the package. So I have had no problems in terms of it being relatively, like I said, 95% accurate the odd time that it loses me, which is to be expected. So maybe with that beacon, it would be even more accurate, but the fact that 95% of the time it's not losing me, then it's not really necessary in my opinion. The connectivity, the reality of that, it's a 1 kilometer range. So, if you're doing very twisty, let's say forest, descents or tree descents, lots of, shrub basically, you are going to have a weird disconnect here and there. That is to be expected. Now, in terms of how fast the drone can track you, it's about 42 kilometers and it can do bursts of like 60 kilometers, but obviously I don't think it can maintain that. The reason why I said I don't think is because I have yet to test this in the mountains. So even when I start descending, I'll probably hover around 40 kilometers, see if it loses me. It most likely will. Because obviously if you're going above 40 kilometers, it's just too fast for the drone. Obviously at this form factor, you don't expect this to go 80 kilometers, 90 kilometers an hour and film you accurately and track you. So just be, aware that for most of your riding, it will be more than sufficient to track you unless you're pushing a big gear on the flats, going above 42, it will be able to track you for most of your riding. But just descents are somewhere where I wouldn't feel too comfortable. And the other thing too I realized is you have to be very careful about the environment, just because if this is tracking you and, you know, trucks are near you and whatnot, you know, I've had some close calls, even with some light poles. So just be aware of your environment, and it's better to be safe than sorry and have a little bit lower speed, lower, you know, busyness of the road than trying to get the most crazy action shot with a lot of dynamic movement like cars and trucks. And now the noise of the drone and legal considerations is obviously important to talk about, because those are just the reality of operating a drone. So it's quite surprisingly quiet for the size. It has a very soft hum that you can hear, but I kind of enjoy the drone sound. It's just kind of peaceful in a weird way. And then in terms of legal considerations, I live near like an army base where they have, airplanes and stuff like that. So, you know, you wouldn't want to just be cycling near the army base. I think you might have a problem. Someone's going to come talk to you. So you just have to be, you know, aware of where you're flying it around. And they also on the app have a map that you can open up to see if there's any restricted areas. Obviously depends on what type of sport you're doing. So if you're using it primarily for gravel cycling, road cycling, you know, there shouldn't be that many trees. Obviously depends. Are you going on bike paths? That's where mine crashed. Are you doing it in like twisty narrow descents? So it really depends on your terrain, but usually for cycling it's going to be fine. Especially I'm also getting into running as well really soon, so you know, for running there will be no problems. It's just open space. And then the price tag I forgot to mention too is 699 USD or 950 CAD or around 650 euros, 680 euros give or take. So you know, it is a competitive price for what you're getting, in the sense of from a practicality standpoint of recording yourself while riding. A lot of the barriers that comes with operating a drone disappears because of the technology that's embedded in the drone. So for full transparency too, I do want to explain that this drone is for a specific type of rider. I would say it's someone that really wants to document their rides. You know, maybe they're traveling, they do a lot of cycling traveling, you're doing a lot of group rides, or you know, you're for a club and you want to document your training or document your training for races. Like, it's a very specific type of cyclist that just wants to have a different angle, because the coolest thing that you will not get with other action cameras, let's say like a 360 or like an Insta360 or like a GoPro, is you will not get an aerial view. You even with the 360 you can use the pole and get like a third person shot, but you will not get like a landscape. And this is where I think the drone is super good, is that if you're trying to show where you're cycling, that is something that the only thing that can do that is a drone, because of the fact that you can get elevation and get different angles. And the other thing too I think is really cool is the side shots are really cool, because even, you know, with the 360 it's just not the same. You basically have that, you know, making the pole disappear. So the way I would explain it is obviously from a content creator perspective, I'd say the Insta360 plus the drone is like the dynamic duo when it comes to making content. I don't have a 360 yet, but the biggest thing I've realized with the drone is that there's a lot of shots that as a cyclist you just miss out on, because it's just not practical. You can't just get an aerial view and have it track you. And that's where this thing really blew me away, was it's the first time that you don't need to have, you know, any experience basically using a drone and get these incredible shots. So obviously I'll be doing a long-term test of this drone, so if you guys want to see that, then like the video, subscribe to the channel. Super excited to see all of what this little drone can do. You can literally just fold it up, put it in your bag, put it in your back pocket, and I'll be using it in those mountains very soon. It's January. I wouldn't say it's freezing, but let's just say I'm not Canadian anymore when it comes to the cold. Like, you know, anything less than 15, I'm shivering. So I'm gonna wait till it warms up a little bit, March, and then we'll be doing some mountain training. So other than that, hope you guys did enjoy the video. If you guys do want to pick yourselves up a unit, there will be a link in the description down below. And until the next one, keep on pedaling.